The No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. My guest today isn't just a writer and podcast host. He's a metaphysical rebel with a vampire's soul and a philosopher's wit, a spiritual hitchhiker, Elvis obsessive, cat herder, and one of the boldest voices in modern Gnosticism. Miguel Conner is a prolific author, a voice artist, and host of the widely respected Aeon Byte podcast, which focuses on ancient Gnosticism and Hermeticism. His books, which include The Occult Elvis, The Mystical and Magical Life of the King, the critically acclaimed Voices of Gnosticism, and the post-apocalyptic vampire saga, The Dark Instant Trilogy, merges esoteric insight with radical storytelling. And as you're about to discover, his 10 best books are less of a list and more like a metaphysical jailbreak kit. Miguel Conner, welcome.
Thanks for having me on. I love that jailbreak kit. That's exactly it.
It is, isn't it? I mean, what else can we say about you?
Yeah.
You probably get that all the time, don't you?
Exactly. Sometimes I wonder, there's a quote by the Egyptian author Naguib Mahfouz. He says, home isn't a place. It's when all of our attempts to escape cease. I make a whole living about escaping the simulation, and I wonder, well, maybe I should stop and just enjoy home, be at home.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I love that quote. I think it's true. So let's talk about what this experience was like for you, and also, what do books mean to you?
Well, as I've said before, I mean, it was Carl Jung who very wisely said, we don't have ideas, ideas have us. We are often, if we listen, we are picked, and for a certain purpose, for a certain growth, a certain evolution. And I say the same thing about books. I think books do pick us at the right time in our lives that are there meant to guide us. And often we go back to these books and we find out, oh my God, I completely missed this part, or I forgot about this part, but this works for me now today. So in a sense, I think that's really what books are. They are a living information, as Philip K. Dick called the Nag Hammadi Library.
I mean, there's been so many people come onto this show, and I would think a huge proportion of them tell us that a book fell out off the shelf at their feet. So I'm beginning to think that, books have invisible wings.
I would certainly agree on that. And again, as I've said before, I don't think books are more than just entertainment, information, or even inspiration. They can induce an altered state of mind. We've all read a good fiction book or nonfiction, and suddenly we close the book and we go, something is alchemically changed with me forever. And even reality looks different. The sun looks different. The sky, people look different. So a good book, or a necessary book, I feel, is sort of a permanent expansion of consciousness.
And such a wonderful gift. I mean, you can really delight when you close a very satisfying book. It really lifts the spirit, doesn't it?
It really does. It's an incredible journey. And of course, there is the shadow side. We don't want to take these books in themselves as holy or completely legalistic, as certain religions tend to do. Yes, they see these books as living information, something from another world, and that's great, but we can't get stuck on it. A book is dynamic. The information changes as you change. The rules change. The morality changes. Everything changes. It's not thou shalt and that's it. Or I read this book, so therefore I'm going to do this ritual and have this worldview for the rest of my life.
Mm. What was it like for you to have to distill the list of all the books you've read down to just 10?
Well, obviously it wasn't easy, but at the same time it became easy because all I have is who I am today. And of course, like everybody, I'm going through, it's my time to go through certain challenges. The summer has been challenging for me. A lot of outside and interior worlds have ended. So I found myself leaning on a lot of these books. It came very easy, books like Awareness and Illusions and the words of Philip K. Dick and so forth. Some of the Gnostic ideas just have been coming to me, and I have these books out as we speak. So in a way, it was no accident that we were going to do this and that I needed to have these 10 books, because those are the books that are really necessary at this point in time.
Mm. Well, let's start with the first book on your list, which is Awareness by Anthony DeMello, published in 1990. What was it about this book that gave it what it needed to land on your list?
It needed to land on my list. Circle back to 1999, and I am in rehab for cocaine addiction. And I'm struggling, first few weeks, you're struggling. You don't know what's up and down. You need help, and you're at the right place. You've destroyed your life like I did, and it was time to start building something back. And I was sitting in the common room waiting to speak to my counselor. And it comes in this tattooed Puerto Rican gangbanger, head shaved, all that. I mean, we're talking something almost stereotypical. And he sits next to me, and we talk about sobriety. And he whips out Anthony DeMello, hands it to me, and goes, "This really helped me with my codependency issues." And walks out. Of all people in the universe, I thought it would help me with codependency. It was this gangster, this gangbanger. And of course, at the time, I needed any sort of lifeline that somebody would send me. I would use it. So I opened the book, and it changed my life. And it's a book that I go back to so many times. And of all people, it's almost how ironic the universe is, because my heroes, because of my podcast, what I do, are individuals who fall more under the Gnostic rubrics, the mystic Christian rubrics, Carl Jung, Philip K. Dick, Mary Magdalene, so forth. But Anthony DeMello was a Jesuit priest. He was also a psychologist. So you would think that's as far away from what I am that I would do it. But he went on an exploration like good Jesuits to study, and he studied all these religions, and he found this perennial wisdom that really worked. At the same time, he had a very hit you over the head humorous take on things that really worked for me. I mean, he is very mocking of our society, as he should be, like Krishnamurti would often be. And but he brings in all these religions and distills this simplified wisdom for us to wake up.
Mm. Wow. I've not heard of this one, but it sounds interesting. Book number 2, Valis, the first book in Philip K. Dick's final trio of novels, published in 1981.
Yeah, Philip K. Dick obviously is one of my favorite authors, period, in science fiction. Most people know him for being the ideas underneath such classic movies like Blade Runner, Total Recall, Minority Report, The Man in the High Castle, and so forth. But at one point in his life, Philip K. Dick had these visions of what the world was. You might say the veil of reality fell, and they were very based on Gnosticism, the idea that we're in a simulation, that we are controlled by these alien beings called archons, that there were these awakened Christians with a third eye, which read the Gnostic Gospels, and he thought he was Thomas, whatever. But he began to explore Gnostic ideas, and Valis is his not only exploration of Gnostic ideas, but his exploration of his own schizophrenia. He was put in wards. He struggled. So it's just this autobiographical, fictional, magic realist story. And it includes David Bowie appearing as another character. And it's not linear. He stops to write about his visions and philosophies on the world. So what he did is, understanding these ancient traditions is never easy. These are people that spoke in a certain language 2,000 years ago, had certain metaphors, worldviews, but Philip K. Dick, using pop culture, science fiction, comparative mythology to synthesize and clarify his Gnostic worldview, helped me clarify my Gnostic worldview. It's not easy reading the Nag Hammadi library or other Gnostic gospels, and Philip K. Dick really did that. And again, it's his story of overcoming schizophrenia, addiction, and trying to find a center where he could work.
What was it about Gnosticism? What is it about Gnosticism that drew your attention?
Well, as you mentioned in the intro, Sandie, I've always been a spiritual hitchhiker, interested in all religions. I love all cultures, religions. There's value there. Humanity's search for God and so forth. But Gnosticism kind of answered the questions in a way that were satisfactory for me. And I like their aesthetic. I like their rebellious anarchist attitude. I like like Anthony DeMello, the way they mocked the world and saw it how absurd it was. And the questions of why is there evil? What happens when we die? Who are we at our innermost? Just, it worked for me. And that's what I've embraced. And I think all traditions at their core really ask the same question. Who am I? The old Apollo temple of Adelphi, know thyself, Gnosticism, Buddhism, they all say that that's why we're here for, to know ourselves. But Gnosticism's narration, aesthetic, philosophy just worked for me. But of course, it's not going to work for everybody else.
Book number 3 is The Gnostic New Age, How a Counter-Cultural Spirituality Revolutionized Religion from Antiquity to Today by April D. DeConnick. This one was published more recently in 2016.
Yes, that's my friend April, who I've met many times at conference from Rice University, that has a very innovative, avant-garde way in how they approach comparative religion. But this is, you might say, one of the latest books that brings where we are in scholarship and Gnosticism. But she also brings her personal ideas. She is, you might say, a believer as well as an academic. She sees Gnosticism in a way that is clear, in my opinion. She, like Philip K. Dick, she tries to help us understand Gnosticism by comparing Gnostic philosophy to modern manifestations, with her specifically movies. Like she'll bring in The Matrix, Dark City, and other, you might say, Gnostic movies, and tries to say, well, it's easier to understand if you watch a modern movie and say these have Gnostic ideas. Let's tie it back 2,000 years ago. And I feel that she really gets what the Gnostics were, because the Gnostics have confounded both their academics, their enemies, their opponents for so long. But at its core, Gnosticism is kind of easy to know. It's an ancient Egyptian form of shamanism that requires us, like the Egyptians, to take these astral flights to other dimensions, to the spirit world, and come back with the medicine to help our souls, our bodies, and our minds. And when you do that, yes, they had certain viewpoints about the world being a simulation and so forth, and certain heroes like Jesus and Mary Magdalene and Hermes Trismegistus. But when you see Gnosticism like that, it just makes perfect sense, and you start understanding what their texts are about.
The next book on your list is a little bit different. It's The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, published in 1954.
I mean, what can I say? It's The Lord of the Rings, right? I mean, it's talk about a book that so many people go back, or they go back to the movies and so forth, because it's so full of inspiration. And like Carl Jung, and before World War II, J.R. Tolkien had his own visions. Carl Jung had these strange visions before World War One and during World War, something that the veils of reality broke down, and he found his ideas in this netherworld. Tolkien had similar experiences. He wrote about encountering these beings in the imaginal, these elves, and they sort of showed him the story. Like he said, he wasn't writing a story, he was discovering a truth, a world that really did exist at some point. And the world is so much better because of it. And there are so many ideas that are just wonderful to approach. I mean, I think the latest one that I realized, especially when you talk about Carl Jung, is at the end, as most people should have spoilers, but I mean, I think we can do spoilers for Lord of the Rings, you know. At the end, it's not Frodo who throws the ring in the volcano, but Gollum takes the ring and falls into it. And that's a great lesson that we cannot defeat evil. We cannot really overcome evil. It's like with Philip K. Dick, to fight the empire is to become infected by its derangement, or Nietzsche, who said, fight ye monsters lest ye become a monster, and so forth. But what we can do is use our shadow to help us, because Gollum is Frodo's shadow. It's his alter ego. It's where he's put all his negativity on. And it's sort of, again, it's his alter ego shadow. And it is his shadow, the dark side of him, that succumbs and saves the day, which is the great lesson that maybe we can't change the world, or we can change the world once we integrate our own shadow. Once we let the darkness within us carry it with us and understand it and deal with it and, suffer because of it, that's when we can defeat the evil out there in the world. So these lessons I learn all the time.
When did you read the book? How old were you?
I read The Hobbit when I was 7 or 8, and I think it was 12. And actually, ironically, on a trip to London with my parents, and I was bored because they were working and sightseeing and all the stuff a 12-year-old doesn't want to see. So I sat in the hotel room for days reading Lord of the Rings, and it was one of the best experiences of my life.
Oh, it is an incredible book, isn't it? Incredible. I don't think there's been any book that I can think of that's had quite the same kind of impact on people.
No.
Book number 5, Stormbringer, by Michael Moorcock, published in 1965.
Yeah, that's he's also one of my favorite fantasy sci-fi authors, along with Tolkien and Philip K. Dick. And he's more on the edge, but he's one of the great innovators of philosophical science fiction, which really came about in the 60s and 70s, where it wasn't just entertaining space stories, but there was a meaning to it. There was an allegory. There was something better. And the Elric saga, it ends with Stormbringer, is a great story. It's an allegory about this kingdom, Melniboné, that's collapsing. And it's an allegory of the British Empire after World War II collapsing and what it's going through, and the anxiety and pain and this deadly world outside that wants to destroy it. And Elric is sort of this emperor adventurer, but he's an albino who has a sword that steals souls. And it also becomes an allegory for addiction, because he has to do terrible things to survive, which is the sword represents as addiction, to save the world. So Moorcock also weaves a lot of great ideas, and he's one of the first people, probably the first, I believe he coined the term multiverse, which has become so popular. He, in Chaos Magic, you've got the 8 arrows. He's the one who designed it. So he really is one of the godfathers of modern philosophical speculative fiction, as well as cyberpunk and so much more.
I mean, Stormbringer has been described as raw, tragic, and oddly addictive. Did it echo something in your own relationship with power or destruction?
I would say so. I mean, I read it probably shortly after Lord of the Rings 13, but books are not only autobiographical, but they are also prophetic. You see yourself in the character, and you sometimes go, is this going to be me? Am I going to go crazy? Am I have addiction? And of course, you're seeing yourself, because as a child, you're already, something's wrong with you. You've been abused. There's been trauma. you don't know how to deal with it except to read. But unfortunately, this trauma and this pain and this brokenness is going to manifest when you're an adult. So that I think that was, why I read such works.
Book number 6. Now, this is one that comes up many, many times over on people's lists. Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah by Richard Bach, published in 1977.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was just reading it last week and I needed it. And it's such a wonderful story. I read it probably in my early 20s, and it really simplified the whole idea, because as seekers and authors and all that, one thing we will do is overcomplicate things, create these Baroque systems and so forth. But Illusions is the great idea that, it really is simple and you really can have fun. We really are all messiahs in the making, and it doesn't matter who we save, because it really is all an illusion. We all have chosen to come down into a movie, like in the book where they go see the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and the Messiah tells the Richard Bach character, you came to see this movie to forget yourself, to try something new, to experience something new, because the oneness, the all, the quantum foam, it's not very exciting. And the great consciousness wants to experience all that could be experienced, and that's what we are. So we choose these movies. So Illusions is just a beautiful, inspirational book with so much wisdom. It's got all these great quotes and so forth. So I can't advise it enough. And I mean that, these books that you always keep more than one copy for the holidays and for friends who are struggling. Oh man, you're struggling. Awareness and Illusions would be the 2 books that I keep to help others, that I love to hand out.
Yeah. Book number 7, another one that appears very frequently, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, 1922.
Yeah, like Valis by Philip K. Dick, who helped me crystallize and grasp Gnostic philosophy. Hesse really helped me understand Buddhism and a lot of the Eastern traditions. And it's such a beautiful, poetic book. I can reread it again and again just for the description and everything. And it has so many wonderful ideas that I love. I think one of them is... again, there's a lot of Jungian aspects in there, because Hesse was a patient of Carl Jung. So you see it a lot in his novels. And you see a lot of these too. Again, there's shadow complexes, so many there. But at a young age, before I even knew who Carl Jung was, the book was sort of a nice prep for the Western esoteric tradition.
Now, book number 8, this is one that intrigues me. I don't know the book, but you say that you've never seen the world the same after reading this novel, both the good and the bad. And it is Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West by Cormac McCarthy, 1985. Tell me more.
Woo! Yeah, talk about an opposite book of what we're talking about, but still has the same nuggets of enlightenment. That would be, Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. It is considered by many as the great American novel, and it is so infused with Gnostic ideas. It's very similar to Moby Dick, which also Herman Melville was influenced by Gnosticism, but it's very visceral, very bloody. It's a critique on how the West was in the 19th century, and it criticizes the ruthlessness of the colonizer, some of the Comanches, the Apaches. It was an intense time there, but it's also a great allegory for Gnosticism too, because it has some of the great characters in, as a story, like the fierce Gnostic demiurge, and so forth, like the divine spark, like salvation. But it is a brutal, hard novel to write. It's historically accurate, no punctuation. That's what's incredible about Cormac McCarthy, is that he will start a chapter and he will end the chapter without a period or a comma, just one long run-off sentence. And I don't know how he does it, but the man was an alchemist. He recently passed. So that is just an incredible novel. But again, it's not for the faint of heart. It has some of the most brutal scenes that I've ever seen. But it also shows that divinity is hiding behind all this darkness, behind the fierceness of nature and the rawness of humanity. There is enlightenment or salvation somewhere there.
Book number 9, The Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin, published in 1968. So now we're really moving into the fantasy.
Yeah, we're back at the fantasy, back at philosophical fantasy.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Ursula Le Guin. Obviously, I have read so many of her books, and I love her philosophies of animism, and she was a great introduction, like in The Wizard of Earthsea, to Taoism, anarchism, animism, so many others, more of the holistic approach to growing, her anti-colonial ideas and so forth. So just an inspirational person. And The Wizard of Earthsea is just it's a beautiful and elegant fantasy about a wizard. And I read it when I was 13, 14. And, as a young kid, you sometimes like to replace yourself for the main character. And sometimes it's hard because, like in Stormbringer and other novels, I'm like, well, I know this character has a really dark side and they make a lot of dumb mistakes. But The Wizard of Earthsea, I wanted to be, I think Geb was his name through the whole thing because it's such a wonderful, elegant epic. I mean, I've read the entire trilogy, and she deals again with so many other themes like death and community and so forth. So love Ursula Le Guin.
What did Ged show you about yourself that made you want to be that character?
Well, I think the exploration, the understanding that it is a magic world that is available to us all. Don't have to be a powerful wizard, but we really are connected, and our words can be magic. I think in The Wizard of Earthsea, also before I knew about Jung, there's a shadow part of him that he has to contend with, just like Frodo has to contend with Gollum. So that also was a precursor to Jungian ideas of shadow integration and all that. I keep bringing it up, but I do think that as people, not as people, but as a culture, I think Western culture, it's time to integrate our shadow, whether it's British or American. Yeah, we did terrible things, but feeling guilty, repressing it, running away from it, irrational, just we can integrate our shadow so that we can have a better future as individuals and as a people.
Yeah. Book number 10, The Secret Book of John, the Gnostic Gospel, annotated and explained. Translated by Stephen. Was it Stephen?
Stephen.
Elvis. Stephen. He has an A in there, not an E.
Yeah. It is different. Yeah, that's one of my favorite books because, again, like Philip K. Dick, he understands the Gnostics. He's an academic like April DeConnick, but you can see he feels the Gnostics. It's like, what did Jimi Hendrix say? The blues is easy to play, but hard to feel. And you can learn music or read a book, but when you feel it, that's what the Gnostics call gnosis, experiential knowledge. You get it and you can express it. April does it. Stephen Davis does that himself because he translates one of the more popular Gnostic Gospels, and he brings out, and his annotations and summaries are just beautiful, inspirational, because sometimes people tend to think that the Gnostics were these sort of existentialist, surly anarchists who saw the world as fallen and evil, and we were controlled by Lovecraftian stellar beings, and all is lost. But that's really not the truth, because when you read books like The Secret Book of John, yes, they show that, the dice is loaded and it's stacked against us, but we've already won. Once we wake up, the game is done. We have the cosmic Christ. We have Sophia, the Gnostic goddess. And there is this beautiful sense of joy in their writings. Yeah, they're describing horrible things about what these beings are doing to humanity, but then they break into these beautiful hymns, and Jesus speaks this very eloquent speeches about the nature of existence, and there's so much joy. That's what people often forget. Apocalypses they're not about the end of the world. They're a revelation of the divine and the divine plan in the universe. And they're always meant to be very joyous things, because at the end, everything's going to be fine. Like Julian of Norwich famously said, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And you see that very much in the Gnostic Gospels. And Stephen does a great job doing that. And also, he very astutely is able to tie Gnosticism into the more positive, non-dual movements of the East, like Advaita Vedanta and a lot of these non-dual ideas, and Kabbalah and other, and he calls them mind model religions, like the Hermeticists, where all is mind, everything's mind. I am housed in the universe is housed within me. So he proves very well that the Gnostics had the same joyous existence is a game that cannot be won, but must be played. And we're all here just discovering ourselves. And he does an excellent job. And I think he really gets what the Gnostics were about.
Do you think that is true? Many people talk about us being, this is apocalypse time that we're living in now. Do you think all will be well?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Everything will be well. If we are awake, if we are evolving, if we can be of service to others. It's that, that speech in Lord of the Rings when Frodo says, I wish it never come to this, or I was born in another time. And he says, so does everybody across history. All you can do is do the best you can do with the time that you have allotted. All of us could die at the end of the day. So what can we do? The best we can do is self-knowledge, help others wake up, and love as much as we can. So the game is never going to change and never has changed. Again, know thyself. That's it. That's all we can do.
Know thyself. Yeah, that's my mantra. So that's your 10 best. Let's talk about you and your work. Of course, we have to start with, I think it's the latest and arguably most intriguing, the Occult Elvis, the mystical and magical life of the king. What is it about Elvis that grabs your attention? You refer to yourself as an Elvis person.
Yeah, now I wasn't. Most of my life I was a Beatles person. Never liked Elvis.
What to write about Elvis then?
Well, going back to the Beatles, John Lennon famously said, life happens when you're busy making other plans. And I was making other plans, very happy to be a Beatles person, no patience for Elvis. I thought he was the musical version of a hamburger or Mountain Dew or something, just, cheap extroverted Americana. But then there was summer of 22. I had some synchronicity. I had some visions. I did a couple of ayahuasca ceremonies, and this voice came from nowhere. And this voice was Elvis. You can't say it wasn't a voice. It was autonomous, but it was a voice. It was an urge. And I became obsessed with Elvis, and he was just everywhere. I couldn't stop listening to his music. Couldn't stop thinking about it. Dressed up in Halloween as Elvis. I never dress up Halloween. It's just, he took over my life as, I don't know if you want to call it channeling. I like to think I became quantum entangled with Elvis. And finally I surrendered. I said, okay, I think you want me to write a book. And the voice is like, yes, there's a part of me that the world is ignoring, and it's time that they hear about it. And sitting down one cold February night, 2023, I sat down with one biography that I'd read, and I just started writing this book. And 3 months later, the book was ready. And here I am. And I am an Elvis person now, I'm proud to say.
Okay. Well, tell me, what led Elvis to seek the occult and the alternative spiritualities?
Like many of us, it's pain, right? Sometimes we go to see the witch or the man in the mountain, not because our lives are working out, right? We go because we need help, because the old ways haven't worked, because we are disillusioned. And Elvis had always been a gifted human being, those supernatural abilities. He'd been open to the alternative spirituality, by the time he was a teenager, he thought reincarnation just made more sense. In the army, he read books like The Prophet by Khalil Gibran and so forth. But it really was in the early 60s when his trauma kept coming up that he wasn't dealing with: the death of his twin brother, Jesse, the death of his mother, growing up in poverty, abuse, all that. It really was nagging him, and he was in pain. And also he was very empty. He was disillusioned with his life. He was, the most famous celebrity in the world, and he felt it wasn't fulfilling him. He was disillusioned with his old religion because they turned on him when he got famous. Many pastors, including Billy Graham's, basically said he was a Satanist. He saw these churches suddenly as businesses. He didn't like the idea of promoting an unloving God. He didn't like their version of Christ. So he was just disillusioned and very down, very depressed. And by a series of syncs, he met a new hairdresser, Larry Geller. And Elvis was very instinctual. He had psychic powers. So in my book, I show how he could read minds, have visions. But Larry is cutting his hair in his mansion in L.A. And, they could have had a small talk. What do you talk about a hairdresser? Oh, what about the weather? What about our team? Do you think we have a chance to win? Or, what we do with our hairdresser? But Elvis didn't. He turned around and he said, Larry, who are you? Remember, self-knowledge. Who are you, Larry? And Larry Geller could have said, well, I cut celebrity hairs and I've been down to this restaurant in Malibu. What do you do in LA? But Larry suddenly said, I like mysticism. I like the bigger questions of life. I like this. And Elvis was like, thank you. And they had a 4-hour conversation in the bathroom in his mansion about the metaphysics. And Elvis was off to the races. Larry brought him all these books on Hinduism, Buddhism, Freemasonry, Gnosticism, started giving him books from Madame Blavatsky and Manly P. Hall and Taoism, and teaching him about astrology, numerology, meditation. And Elvis was off to the races, and alternative spirituality became really just as important as his entertainment career for the rest of his life.
I've heard hints over the years that there was more to Elvis than we got to see. But how is it that we never knew this kind of depth, this information? Was it just covered up because it didn't fit with the image?
I think people see what they want to see. We do that with family members, people we're dating, politicians. We see what we want to see because we don't want change and we don't want the pain that's going to affect our worldview. It's easier to put Elvis as this especially in the United States. I don't know about the UK, but as this good old Southern boy who has the same religion I do and my parents did. They don't want to change that because, again, there's tens of millions of people in this country who love Elvis passionately, and they like that image, but it's just not true, and it's hard to change. And again, Sandie, everything I get about his miracles, about his occult studies and meditation circles and wearing an Egyptian ankh, this ain't your grandma's Elvis. I get these from mainstream biographies. You can go right now to the library and get Priscilla Presley's book, The Memphis Mafia, family members, and it's all there. But it's scattered here and there and all that. And my job was to bring it all there. I got nothing from the tabloids or YouTube conspiracy. It's all there in mainstream, lauded, heavily copy edited biographies, stories, and articles. And I put it together. And I think people right now, Elvis fandom hasn't really accepted it. They're like they're ostriches with their heads on the ground, and that's fine. Another thing too, and I think I make this mistake a lot, is we hear about Hollywood people and rock stars with their eccentricities, and we just sort of roll our eyes and said, well, that's what they do, right? Oh, Ronald Reagan was into astrology. Madonna was into Kabbalah. David Bowie was into Thelema and Jimmy Page, and they're doing all these strange things, and we just sort of write it off like it's part of being an eccentric entertainer, and then we move on with our lives. And that's a pity, because I feel, as you start studying that alternative spirituality, these things are essential to their music. I mean, without Hinduism, the Beatles might not have had such a good latter part of the 60s. We might not get Revolver or Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I mean, these are essential to these artists, and they're very important to them. But again, we tend to just write it off and move on with our lives.
Well, there's one question some people, me especially, have about Elvis, and I was always a big fan, and that is, if he was so intuitive and had these, gifts, these abilities, why could he, what was this whole thing with him and the Colonel, who was patently, using him and stopping him from doing the things that he wanted to do in terms of his acting career? Why, what was that all about? Has he ever given you any clues?
I think I offer different views to see him, but the way I see it, maybe I'm in the minority. I don't see anything wrong. Elvis was popular, but Colonel Parker took him to stratospheres that the world hadn't seen, and they worked really well together. I mean, I tried to compare it in the alchemical tradition, and as well as Rudolf Steiner. And in these traditions, for example, with Rudolf Steiner, you have two forces in the world. You've got the Lucifer force. That's the mercurial, playful, trickster, powerful. That's Elvis, right? But he's out of control. Then you've got Ahriman, which is numbers, boundaries, limitations, like Saturn. When they're apart, they're a mess. They don't work together. But if you put them together, you create, guess what? A Christ force. It can hold a Christ conscience, a Messiah like Elvis would become. And in alchemy, it's the same thing. You're in your laboratory. Mercury is all over the place. He's being Mercury. You need a Saturnine force to create Mercury. And I bring other ideas, but yeah, they were just perfect. They were almost like two forces that when they came together, they became this sort of hermaphrodite ultimate force that were unstoppable. And I think Elvis, of course, he was brought up about loyalty. He thought the Colonel brought him good luck. He was the one that took him out and took him to incredible places. So he was going to be loyal. And you also have to understand, I mean, yeah, Elvis didn't like his movies in the 60s, but that was a time when he was one of the highest paid Hollywood actors. He was making money that Paul Newman and Elizabeth Taylor were making. So, he had the millions of dollars that he was making, and he had an entire city that he was really just supporting. That was the thing about Elvis. He had this Southern loyalty. I got to support people, friends, family, buy them cars, houses, and he felt he had to do that. Plus, he was becoming very spiritual. So he didn't mind doing these shallow movies because he was he was so happy meditating and all that. Also, remember, they were working together for 20 years. And they had some bad times, but during the good times, they got along really well. They were friendly. They went to each other's houses. They had this, but when things were bad with the drugs or death, then they would go into conflict and they had issues. But they had a long relationship, and I think it was just one of those. They needed each other. I mean, what did Larry Geller say? Colonel Parker and Elvis didn't like each other, but they liked power even more. So, but I give many esoteric ideas and lenses so the reader can see beyond Steiner, from a Jungian lens, from others. So try to understand the relationship. And I don't think, he did owe Elvis a lot of money after Elvis died, but during his career, they were pretty good to each other. And I mean, Elvis had his pills, but the Colonel had to gambling addiction that ultimately destroyed him. It's very sad.
Do you still communicate with him?
Yes. Except I finished the Elvis book, and I was like, oh, I'm done, Elvis. I have all these candles and pictures and dolls. I have my own Elvis place of worship, if you would. And I said, oh my God, I'm done. I don't ever want to write another biography. I never thought, it was not on my bingo card or bucket list to write a rock biography. I'm done. But then this other voice came and said, no, we're not done. You forgot about Elvis 2.0. And I was like, who is Elvis 2.0? David Bowie. And this voice came, and I just finished the first draft, and I realized, oh my God, they are the same character. They really are. As strange as it sounds, they are one of the same cosmic force. Except Bowie is more of a messiah of Western Europe and Britain and so forth, while Elvis is more of the modern messiah of the United States.
No, that's an interesting one. When's that book coming out?
I think I finished the first draft, so I'm going to pitch it to the publisher, same publisher, probably next week. So fingers crossed in about a year and a half. So, and it's something else.
So tell me about your book, Voices of Gnosticism, interviews with Elaine Pagels, Marvin Meyer, Bert Ehrman, Bruce Chilton. You've interviewed so many of the prominent scholars in the Gnostic field. Which conversation shifted your perspective the most?
Oh, that's a very good question. It's hard to tell. Bruce Chilton, I think it might have been April DeConnick, because again, when you interview somebody who's both an academic and a believer who accepts these Gnostic truths, it's a lot easier to see it, and they speak so well. Bart Ehrman, of course, brilliantly expresses Gnostic ideas, but that's Bart Ehrman. He's so smart. But they're all great. I mean, some of these individuals were the very translators of the Nag Hammadi library. They worked very hard. They really got empathy for the Gnostics. They're trying to show the truth about this community in ancient times. So I respect all of their ideas and all of their takes and all of the hard work they've done.
Where do you think that, mainstream religion still misunderstands Gnosticism?
That's a very good question. I think part of it is it still has a lot of detractors, if we can say anything about the Gnostics. They've been oppressed or persecuted or outright destroyed for 2,000 years because the status quo, like when Elvis came out, does not like individuality, does not like this force that says find your own answers, take your own inner journey, be passionate, like shamanistic, ecstatic. And so the Gnostics, so a lot of polemics and caricatures have been created about the Gnostics for 2,000 years, and that hasn't helped. Again, and so therefore a lot of people, again, assume that the Gnostics were these, again, people that hated the body and hated the world and all that, and it's stuck. And also, again, let's be real. The idea that you yourself have to take an inner journey and connect with your higher self or your Christ consciousness or your goddess, most people don't want to do that. They want a list. They want the rituals. They want everything packaged perfect. I get that way too. I wish I could do 15 steps to become enlightened and that's it. But no, like the Gnostic said, there's a lot of ego death, self-destruction, pain. And you will go to the underworld to meet your shadow, your dragons, your demons, and they might tear you apart like they used to tear apart shamans, like they tore apart like Osiris being torn apart. So many people just don't want to do it. It's what Anthony DeMello said, Sandy. He's like, most people don't want spiritual awakening. They want their broken toys mended. I want my wife like she used. I want my old job. I want my childhood. They want their broken toys mended, but they don't want to change. And I admit, I get that. I am no better than anybody else, Cindy.
So you wrote the Dark Instinct trilogy. What inspired you to create a vampire-led post-apocalyptic world as the background for spiritual awakening?
Well, it is one of those that you have a vision. I once had this vision in my 20s What would happen if there was a vampire bar and a vampire walked in and said, I need a drink? What would they serve him? They'd serve him blood. Well, where do they get the blood? And what's the society outside this vampire bar? And I said, well, the vampires now rule the earth. Well, how did they do that? And they orchestrated a nuclear war that destroyed humanity. And they corralled all the remaining humans into these city-states in the ashes. And now because there's ash in the sky, no sunlight, they can be around 24/7. They're all powerful. And well, what would happen then? Well, like always, the powerful rewrite history, right? They've always done it. So the head of the vampires, Lilith, the queen of darkness, would say, well, we're going to rewrite it and say that vampires were never human. Humans are this other lower caste. They're animals. They're not even real. And vampires are simply an evolutionary step. So they're separate. So that way vampires have no guilt, eating, terrorizing, treating humans like chattel and so forth. And then it kept going. And then, of course, one vampire wakes up and realizes something's wrong with my society. The old story. And he starts telling, what if we were human? What if our society is not as benign? What if we we find out we destroyed this beautiful nature with nuclear weapons and so forth. So it's sort of a mental Gnostic exercise.
Do you like writing fiction?
I do, but I don't very much anymore. Again, I ever since Voices of Gnosticism and the Elvis book and all that, it's been a while. And I do have a couple of unfinished novels like so many writers, but now is not the time because people like Elvis and Bowie are very demanding. They don't take no.
So now tell me about Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio.
That was a podcast I started many, many moons ago before the podcast. And it really wasn't a podcast. It was one of those, I had read the Nag Hammadi library, I'd read Philip K. Dick, and I was so excited about these Gnostic ideas. But I didn't know much. So I said, well, why don't I talk to these scholars? And we've done that in the 90s, right? You call up a scholar, or, can I just have lunch with you? I want to learn more. But I said, why don't I just, instead of calling them up and talking about this Gnosticism stuff, why don't I interview and record them and just embed them in my website? Again, there was no podcasting back then. It was just something I enjoyed doing. And so I started doing that, and there was no schedule. It's like, oh, I got Elaine Pagels wants to talk to me at this time. Okay, we'll record it. I'll embed it on my social media. On my website. Maybe I'll put it on MySpace or Twitter. That was new. And I just kept doing that for years. And then eventually the podcast era came. I started doing it more often. And then around 2018, I started doing it full time as the golden era of podcasting started. And it's just me talking to people about Gnostic Hermetic ideas and their satellite traditions that go around it, like Sufism and Kabbalah and the Cathars, and just enjoying and spreading information. As I often like to say, it's not gnosis unless you give it away. You got to share the good news with others.
Of course you have. Of course you have. Can't just keep it to yourself. No, that's
a great quote in the Gospel of Thomas. If you bring forth what is within you, it will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, it will destroy you. Saying 42. And that's a great, don't suppress your shadow. Don't suppress your art, your soul. And the Gnostics said this 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. And Maya Angelou said that. She said everybody, they hold their story inside them. They need to share it with the world because, other people's stories are so important to us.
Yeah. That's what Jung said, is evil is when we're not allowed to share our stories. And that's when the other forces of the status quo and Ahriman and all that win the game.
Yeah. So what's the title of the new book?
The David Bowie book? Right now it's just the Gnostic David Bowie. But it could change. The Elvis book started as America's Magician. And then the publisher, I think, wisely called it the Occult Elvis. And that's because Bowie was so influenced by Gnosticism, unconsciously and consciously. He knew about Jung and Elaine Pagels and the Gnostic Gospels. And he was very influenced of Gnosticism through the works of William Burroughs and other figures. So, and you start, if you, again, like Elvis, you take a different look at Bowie, whether it's Diamond Dogs or Station, you go, oh my God, he really is talking about Gnosticism. I was wrong the whole time. Even a song like Modern Love, no religion, no, very Gnostic song couched as a pop tune.
So is this going to become a whole series? Who next?
I don't know. I've been wondering who could be Elvis 3.0. I can't find him. Prince? I mean, that's the closest I can come up with.
What about Michael Jackson?
Could be another one. Yeah, we could take a deep dive because Prince was very much into alternative spirituality, conspiracy, but we might look behind Michael Jackson, like with Elvis, and find a whole new world. I'll wait till the voice comes. I'm not going
to. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we ask every guest on the show this question. Steve Jobs famously gave every attendee at his memorial a copy of Paramahansa Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi. What book would you want to pass on to your memorial guests?
I would have to say Awareness by Anthony DeMello. I think that would be the book. And Elvis would disagree because that was one of his favorite books. And he did study under Yogananda's successor, Dayamata, for years. But so, yeah, Elvis would disagree with me. But
Yeah. Miguel Conner, thank you for adding your 10 most influential spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it. Wait, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's the obligatory farewell, I have to say.
Yeah. Well, before we close, just what can we take from this conversation with Miguel about his 10 best list? For me, it's that sometimes the greatest spiritual truths aren't cloaked in incense and scripture, but in comic books, B-movies, vampire epics, and the lyrics of an occultist rock icon from Memphis. And it's that the sacred isn't always solemn, and divinity doesn't always speak in whispers. It sometimes screams through distortion amps and paperback fiction. So here's something to sit with. What if the universe keeps sending us the same message over and over, but we only hear it when it comes wrapped in myth, madness, or melody? And what if awakening isn't about escaping this strange world, but finally seeing it for what it really is? Miguel Conner's latest book, The Occult Elvis, The Mystical and Magical Life of the King, is published by Inner Traditions and Bear & Company. For more information about his podcast lectures, paperbacks, audiobooks, and blog posts, visit miguelconner.com. And for Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, visit thegodaboveGod.com. Love the name of that URL. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me. And thank you again to Miguel Conner.
Thank you.
If today's conversation sparked your curiosity, you'll love our other shows. The Synergy Sessions, where leading-edge thinkers collide in bold, unscripted dialogues that ignite new possibilities. Between Realms and Reason, where we journey into the mysterious consciousness, energy, and the hidden layers of reality, where science converges with spirit in ways you've never imagined. And the No BS Spiritual Book Club, where leading-edge new thought speakers, teachers, authors, and luminaries who've walked this path before you share the 10 books that had the biggest impact on their life journey. All 3 shows are available on YouTube, Spotify, Substack, and all major podcast platforms. For more information, visit sedgbeer.com. That's SEDGBEER.com.